Welcome back, peeps, to Perfect.dev, where we give you cats the freshest dose of dev snacks.
Now with your amazing hosts, Alex Patterson and Brittany Postma. This episode brought to you by Storyblok. Build anything and publish everywhere. What up, peeps?
Hello. We decided seconds before the show started that this is actually just my show now, so I'll start the introduction. Howdy. Welcome to Semantics. Definitely the stream it is. It's purple and it's accessibility. It couldn't be any other stream.
This is fantastic.
I knew Ben was going to do that. That's
some antics, crossover, takeover episode.
Yeah, there's definitely antics happening, so I'll give you that much. So for everyone who didn't just completely confuse, this is Perfect.dev, but Ben is joining us, who also has a podcast called Semantics. Should I say some antics?
Some antics.
I always have to break it up.
Like
some
pause?
antics. Mainly because I'm responsible for writing the captions for my own stream. And if I don't break it up, then every time either it will say semantics like HTML or it'll say Samantha. And I'm sure Samantha's wonderful, but she has no part on my stream.
Oh, that's hilarious.
What do you use for your captions? Do you
I use Descript, which I feel like anytime you like go on Twitter and you're like, hey, what should I do for captions? Someone's like, have you heard about our Lord and Savior Descript? And Descript is wonderful. But the problem with it is when you're captioning an hour's worth of content every week, it's still way too much, right?
Yeah.
Descript is like the sweet spot for me would be like if I were to like start publishing like 8-minute videos or whatever, like then Descript all the way. But like an hour every week, fam, it's exhausting. But for those who don't know, Descript is like it's AI text or like speech recognition that like is supposed to generate a transcript for you, and you can assign like speakers to all the different parts of the transcript. Then you can like export it into any medium you like subtitle files and stuff like that. So that's what I've been using. But man, is it draining every week.
We do FYI Fridays at work, and they shoot for 30 seconds, and those are great in Descript because those are like
yes.
It's like just 3 paragraphs, or not even 3 paragraphs.
So this is something that I think that folks who don't do content creation don't necessarily know, which is that like captioning, if that's something that you're committed to, even with tools like Descript, it takes so long. For me, I found that for the amount of polish I like, it takes me 7 times longer than the content itself to have the captions already. Yeah. So if I do an hour stream, I'm also committing to like at least 7 hours of captioning in a week, and that adds up, right?
We have possibly a solution for you that we've been demoing just recently. It's called Contenda, and I really am excited about it.
Okay.
We'll see. We can talk after. I'll show you
something. We'll talk when we're not just using this stream to talk shop when we're
when we're supposed to be talking about accessibility today. That's why we have Ben on, who is an expert in accessibility. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into all of this?
Sure. So howdy. I'm Ben Myers. I for my day job, I'm a software developer at Microsoft. I work on Microsoft's documentation platform. So if you've ever been to docs.microsoft.com, chances are possible I've had a hand in something you've seen there. So I am an accessibility advocate. I've been doing accessibility basically as long as I've been doing web development. I blog about accessibility over at benmyers.dev, and I have my own stream, as has been alluded to a couple times here, called Some Antics, twitch.tv/someanticsdev, where every week I bring on guests from around web development and web design to teach me something about building great user experiences for the web in a hands-on way with a focus on accessibility and or core web technologies. Alex and Brittany, do I need any more caffeine?
You did not have that memorized at all. Like, you have said that so many times that it is just like, it just flows out.
Yeah. No, I've had to recite that like so much. It's I mean, you gotta have that elevator pitch, but then it gets to the point where you can say it in like 1 or 2 breaths. But yeah, so that's what I do. I'm an accessibility advocate. I love teaching people about accessibility. I love making website more accessible to our users. And so yeah, I'm super excited to be here to be chatting about accessibility. As well as my hostile takeover of the show.
It's not so hostile. It's been very nice.
It was a very friendly ransom note.
Um,
It said please.
when we talk about accessibility a lot, you
Yeah.
often hear the term ally. Do you want to give the folks the easy breakdown of what
Sure.
that stands for?
So, yeah. So this is a difficult thing to talk about out loud, which is this abbreviation for accessibility, which is spelled A11y. Some people will pronounce it ally, as Alex has done. I tend to say ally most of the time, personally. Some folks will just say accessibility. Some will say A11y. Some will say A11y. This is a numeronym, which is a kind of abbreviation that's built from a word. So there's
You
in the
just
word
blew my
accessibility-
mind that you knew what that was called.
It's a numeronym. Yeah, so there are 11 letters in the word accessibility between the A and the Y. So it's A, 11 letters, Y, A11y, or ally.
Oh,
And
I
it just
had
happens to,
heard that.
yeah,
I forgot.
it's so good. So
Numeronym. Whew.
this is so numeronyms are especially popular thanks to Twitter, especially because Twitter used to only allow 140 characters per tweets. And so if you wanted to talk about accessibility, if you were going to use that word over and over again, right, like it was going to eat up a lot of your character limit very quickly. And so Twitter especially is kind of where ally A11y, whatever you want to call it, however you want to pronounce it, that's kind of where it got big. But yeah, there's other numeronyms. You've almost definitely seen I18N, which is internationalization. Same
Yep.
trick. There's 18 letters between the I and the N, etc. So there's also Lion, L10N, which is localization. There's you know what?
Sorry, not to be confused with leet code or leet speak.
Right.
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 Like,
Yeah.
they look similar, but they're not the same.
Yes. But for accessibility, it has this lovely effect of looking like the word ally. And so that I think has led to the A11y numeronym sticking in people's brains much more. So yes. Yeah, that's what accessibility is, or I guess not what accessibility. That's what that numeronym is. It's short for accessibility because it's the number of letters you took out. Thank you, Twitter.
That is a new thing for me. I never knew that's what it was called. We were talking about like PHP the other day, and I can't remember that one either. But that's not acronym either.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that is a recursive acronym at this point, right? Because like the first P in PHP stands for PHP, I think.
Yeah, I don't. It's pre-processed
What?
hypertext.
I'm so sorry,
pre-
Brittany. This is what you've been brought into.
Oh,
Yeah.
I mean, we have to get all the acronyms out before we can talk about accessibility, right? I mean,
Yeah.
maybe.
As a small
Yeah.
tangent.
Well, you got to clear up the jargon, and also to call out, like, a practical reason to know this acronym is that if you're on Twitter, for instance, a lot of accessibility content like references and stuff like that can be found at hashtag A11y.
Yep.
So if you're looking for where are the accessibility practitioners on Twitter, they're in A11y. Cue someone going, but is the A11y acronym accessible? I think it's inaccessible. Like, this is immediately the dude bro that pops up, like the reply guy that pops up. It's like, oh, the A11y isn't accessible. But
Oh, jeez.
I was wondering if it was. So when I did our tweet out for this podcast, I was like, I'm going to spell out accessibility because I think A11y would sound weird coming out of a screen reader, right?
so this is an interesting take, right? First of all, yeah, it is clunky. Anytime you stick letters inside words, cough, cough, White Panther. We love you, Selma, but this is something that screen readers are going to choke on. I haven't actually personally tested a screen reader against the name White Panther, for instance, but I'm sure it would be something more like WTEP 4 3R, which is not very easy to understand. But this actually gets to an interesting point, which is that sometimes when we're doing when we're practicing accessibility, when we're building more accessible sites, we overcompensate, and we figure like, oh, something must be a huge problem. Let me try to, maybe I'll add in some like hidden text or whatever, or I'll add in like a pronunciation note, and I'll do some like weird like aria finagling and stuff like that. We can actually make the experience worse for other people too. If you if you have a node that says like White Panther, and that's the visual label, and you replace it with like an accessible like screen reader text that's like, you know, a pronunciation of White Panther, like the phonetic spelling or something like that. Now you have this problem of, well, if someone's using a screen reader with a Braille device, a refreshable Braille display, it's called, which is a like peripheral that like has Braille dots that raise or lower. Well, the text that gets exposed to the Braille display is now your phonetic spelling, not the original words.
Okay.
And so you were trying, like, you swung the pendulum too far, right? And this is kind of an interesting thing of like, you know, screen reader users are innately familiar with the quirks of their screen readers. They use them day in, day out. They know how they work. And so they know how, like, if a word is confusing to them, they know how to go back to that word and check it out letter by letter to see what it means, right? We don't have to, like, be overbearing necessarily and, like, overcorrect. We can do a few things here and there. It's probably still better to avoid leet speak overall if you can help it. But, like, you don't need to overcorrect. It's like, if you're driving with a GPS and the GPS mispronounces the name of a street, you don't go, "Oh, I don't know what street this is." You move on with your day and you drive down and you go, "That was a bit funny," right?
Yeah, you kind of like try to figure it out.
Yeah.
I have to before we get too far off of like the thing that we kept saying. Let me share my my screen really quickly so we can show off this person. So this is Selma.
Oh,
this is who we're talking about with White Panther. I just wanted to clarify, like, this is what we're talking about when we say White Panther, and like the spelling of it for those who are able to see this out there. Selma is a partner, another DX person at Netlify with Brittany. So we hang out with her too. Thank you, Selma, for having the tricky name we can talk about.
She at least does say it out like that. So she'll say White Panther, and she said, or if you use a screen reader, White P4NTH3R.
Wow.
So she says it out every time she calls her name out.
That's really cool.
Yeah. And so like this, I don't know, like we're already kind of discussing like the like philosophical abstract accessibility conundrums, but like I think this is a great point to call out is like, you know, you and I, like the three of us here on this call, we are not suited to solve this problem. we are not the people who are impacted by this.
That's true.
The people
100%.
who are the people who depend on screen readers, largely speaking, blind and low vision users, also some people with dyslexia, for instance. But you and I, like we defer to their judgment. We hear what their take on it is, right? But we don't necessarily need to assume that we need to overcorrect.
Yep, that's totally true.
Yes.
So that brings up kind of the bullets I had put out here, because when I think of accessibility or ally or ally, what I immediately go to, and Brittany like has to correct me constantly, is color contrast. So what are some tips and tools that you use to go about like website design and dealing with color contrast? How can we build that into our like CI/CD pipeline?
Okay, so you've asked a bunch of questions that are all kind of disparate.
I should have like paused.
So you're good. So there is a flow here, right? And actually, this might be a good time to show Brittany, if you've got the like link that I shared. I built ahead of time, like because I'm doing a couple of accessibility streams. I built an intentionally inaccessible website.
So this is a very common one that we see.
Yeah. The idea here, right, is this is supposed to look, it looks like a plausible website that you could see in the wild, right? Where clearly there have been some kind of egregious design issues and stuff like that, but this is plausible, right? Or like, you know, you wouldn't see the placeholder 800 by 800, but like it's a plausible website, right? It's a plausible recipe website that uses kind of modern design tactics. The idea of building an intentionally inaccessible website for design purposes is nowhere new. It's nothing new, but a lot of the ones I've found seem to have like design that's clearly stuck in the aughts, you know, and therefore it doesn't feel applicable to modern day web, you know. And so I wanted to have a site that at least felt modern, and so that's what this is. And so one instance of color contrast failures on this site is actually in that nav bar. It's got that like vibrant red, that kind of crimson color, right? And the white text I know, because I built this inaccessibly, that white text does not stand out enough from the red. So how could someone have found that? Well, for things like color contrast, which are fairly easily surfaceable with like automatically detectable, because it's a formula. We have like in accessibility spaces, we have a magical formula that tells you given two colors, what's the contrast ratio, and then we have thresholds. The easiest way as a developer to get the color contrast issues on your page are with a tool like Axe DevTools. Is there a chance you have Axe installed?
I thought I did, but I do on Firefox. So let me.
Okay.
Or I definitely do have something for accessibility on Firefox, but I'm in
Okay.
Chrome right now.
I
This is
think
my problem not using Chrome day to day.
yeah. I
Hey,
think
would you
when
mind on Chrome? Maybe we can click on the like inspect to show it. Never mind.
It's right here. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm in there, but I'm not seeing
So
it.
the
I thought
the top cursor, where the you know how to switch to mobile, where that is, very
Yeah.
top left, the one next to that, to the left of it. Yeah, if you click that
yeah.
and then just hover over the
Oh,
text.
you just hover over it. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. I was
Yeah.
like, I knew
Okay.
this. So there's this accessibility section, but okay,
Yeah.
there we go.
Okay. Okay, so it is giving you this readout. So I would probably prefer to use, personally, I would use something like Axe DevTools, because
Cool.
that does a full page scan and it tells you everything in one go. However, it's going to give you information like this. So let's use this for now, and then maybe we come back to Axe. But like, I love something like that because things like checking every combination of text color against background color is tedious, right?
Yeah.
None of us want to do that. None of us want to do it on repeat, right? And none of us necessarily can confirm for sure whether our tiny little CSS tweak is going to be completely safe everywhere this stuff is used, right? We can't necessarily check it. So having something like an automated scanner is really good for surfacing those really tedious things, right?
Yeah.
Especially repetitive issues. So yeah, as you can see, it pops out this like, if you hover over the like nav links, yeah, it pops out. It's a little hard to see at the size, but there's a bit where it says contrast. Oh,
I was trying to get it zoomed in, but it
yeah,
doesn't zoom in the little pop over.
that seems like an oversight on the part of
Yeah.
the browser. But anyways, yeah, so it says contrast. It'll give you a little preview of the text against background. And then it says this 3.98. And there's this little like warning exclamation mark telling you, hey, this isn't great, right? There's a problem here. Can you mouse into the tooltip? Is that possible?
I don't think so.
No,
No, as
okay.
soon as you, yeah.
Totally fine. So let's what I would do now is I would open up a new tab, presumably run some sort of automated testing tool. This problem has come up, right? Let's search for, let's like Google WebAIM contrast checker. Yeah,
I have used this one before.
and it's this first link. So this tends to be where I go, because WebAIM is a fantastic resource for anyone looking to learn accessibility. Just like find a random page at some point and just read it and see what it has to say. And here we would plug in some colors. So I happen to know, and I'm going to pull this up on my end just so that we've got everything. Let's see. So I happen to know that the text is in fact white, and the problem is in the nav bar. So let me find, where are my, I'm trying to get you the hex code real quick.
That's okay. I think we can actually with this.
Oh, it's the header. Yeah.
Does it say the hex code in here? It doesn't. I thought it did.
So it's actually the if you scroll up, there should be a header element, or yes, and that's what has the background. There you go. Yeah, there's the hex code. So you get these two hex codes, and you plug them in, and oh yeah,
it cut it off.
There's a
EA3C53.
Yep. Cool.
There we go.
Yeah. So here we go. We plugged in our colors, and as you can see, we're getting some results, and it actually passes some tests and fails some tests. So let's talk about what we're seeing here. First of all, up above, there's this contrast ratio. So the colors that we've submitted have been passed through a mathematical formula that has been decided by basically a bunch of web accessibility professionals. There's a chance this formula could change in a future version of our web accessibility requirements. However, that still needs to be vetted. Put a pin in that for years down the line. But for now, this is the formula we've got. and it's spat out this ratio. So this ratio spans from 1 to 1, which is you've compared any color to itself, all the way up to 21 to 1, which is the maximum contrast, which can only be attainable with, anyone want to take a guess at those?
Black and white.
Black and white, yes. So it's also like this like exponential curve type thing. So once you start getting higher contrast, like you get higher contrast faster, if that makes sense. So this tells us we've got a ratio of almost 4 to 1. And that passes some thresholds, fails others. So let's talk about these thresholds then. In web accessibility spaces, we have a set of standards, like industry standards and legal standards for web accessibility requirements. And those are the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. And we can kind of talk about that more. But WCAG has 3 tiers of conformance. So there's level A, level AA, and level AAA. A is maybe you thought about accessibility once, right? Like you've done less than the bare minimum, basically. AA is the legal and industry standard. This is what most companies are trying to target. This is if you're invested in making sure you don't get sued. This is the standard that the courts are holding companies to. By and large, AA is your target. Then there's AAA, which is very pie in the sky. Like you've thought of just about everything and you're like super compatible, super interoperable and stuff like that. It's for some forms of media, not inherently possible. But
oh, interesting.
Yeah. So it's nice to target AAA when you can, but by and large, you're trying to meet the AA requirements. Yeah. So the lines in here that we care about are wherever it says WCAG AA. And as you can see, there are 3 standards here. So there's normal text, which is, your average body text. That has to meet a threshold of 4.5 to 1. So as you can see, we're about 4 to 1, right? We're kind of just under the threshold. Then there's large text, which is, there's a definition, and you could scroll down for the full definition, but basically it's like bigger and or bolder. Think heavy text, basically, right? Yep. And so that has to meet a required threshold of 3 to 1 color contrast because it's bigger, right? It's easier to see. Yes. And so the rules are a little laxer. And similarly, there's this graphical objects and user interface components like icons or form fields. And those have to also meet 3 to 1. So color contrast is curious in that it doesn't tell you how different 2 colors are. It tells you how discernible one color is on the other. And there's some interesting side effects of that. So if you just Google Ben Myers color contrast, you'll find an article I've written on this subject because I want to show you my favorite example of this.
Post?
Oh yeah, actually they'll take you to my new tag page. Excellent. And click the one page or the one post I've got on this. There you go. And scroll down. There's going to be a very vibrant example that you cannot miss. There you go. So this demo, we see some orange text that reads, "You don't want to read this," and it's against a blue background. And
I have a small tangent. Is this orange or is this red?
It's tomato.
So
it's reddish orange.
This looks very similar to the spelt color, and a lot of people call it orange, and I say it's more red. And so I'm sorry, I had to ask. I had to ask the team.
Yes, so this is literally, these are the CSS colors, tomato and cornflower blue.
Okay, yeah.
And if you look at the 2 circles, right, the 2 colors separate, they look very different, right? I don't know if any of us on this call have color blindness. I don't. For me, these are clearly 2 separate colors, right? But they only have a color contrast ratio of 1.009 to 1.
Wow.
Which is barely better than comparing any color to itself.
Yeah.
And as you can see, like it's really hard to read that text. Like we can read it. I've put it up like big and bold and stuff like that. We can read it, but like it's not pleasant, right? So this is the distinction between similar colors versus discernible colors. And color contrast is accounting for human perception here. And it's specifically like how easily could you discern this text against this background? So yeah. But it's gray, really gray in CSS. I love it. So let's scroll down though, because I mentioned the kind of laxer requirements when it comes to large text versus small text. I've got an example of that. Just keep going.
Okay.
So we've got 2 lines of text on this gray background. they're the same color, but this top line is bigger and bolder, and it is easier to read. It says the words, "I'm somewhat easier to read." There is a line of text underneath it that's easy to miss if you're on like an extra like bright monitor or something like that, but it says, "I'm much harder to read," and it's smaller and thinner. So like the same color, it's very contextual, right? It also depends on kind of your font stuff, right?
Yes.
But this actually kind of clues us into how we could address something like color contrast, because we actually have 2 ways we could go about it. Y'all want to take a guess at what those 2 ways are?
I don't know which direction you're going.
That's fair. So we have a color contrast pair. By the way, Alex, you are muted, by the way. But we have a color contrast pairing on our kind of demo site that fails, right? And we actually have 2 approaches we could do to get this kind of back in the green.
Okay.
Do you want to? Okay, I think you've figured it out now. You want to take a stab?
To make the text darker or bigger and a heavier font weight.
So that's one thing, right? We could make the font bigger. We could make it like font size bigger and make it bold and stuff like that. And that would, because we're actually at 4:1, if we have big enough text, we only need to meet 3:1, right? So like we basically cheat by having bigger text with laxer requirements. But that text size, those requirements are very clearly like much more around like headings. So that's not always plausible for every kind of text. You can't make every text big enough to only do the 3:1. So instead, what we could do is we could change the actual colors that are being used. And so at this point, I want to recommend a site I discovered very recently. I'm going to put a link to this in kind of our in our StreamYard.
Chat.
I'll put it in StreamYard, and then I'll also put it in Twitch chat.
Oh, nice.
Perfect.
This is I've used this very recently to address an issue. And what this does is you plug in those hex codes. So the text color is all white, and then
They don't have to be in RGB, I assume. We can just get the hex codes.
Right.
Perfect.
There we go. And then notice that it's got this drop down that says color to edit the text color, or you so let's choose edit the background color because our text is white, right? Like we're not going to be able to get anything better by like, you can't have more contrast than white,
Yeah.
So we're instead going to tweak our background color. Let's go ahead and hit find valid colors. And this will think for a moment, but then it's going to give us some new background colors that we could use, like this first one. And notice, right? These colors are not that different from the one we started with. They're just tweaked enough that it works. And so this top one, if we had instead used the hex code EA1636, we would have basically exactly a 4.5:1 ratio. So that was just a minor change that actually got us where we need. And, if you're worried about protecting your brand colors, this isn't a radically different red, right? It's just different enough to work. So,
wow.
I was going to say, like on this, we can actually, can we just play with this? Like you can kind of tweak the lightness on the background color. I saw that. Has that always been there?
It's been there, yeah. And so I like that as well too.
I like that this gives you like a bunch of different options though, that it shows you different ways.
When you think like you always have to bring this back to the constraints that like organizations have, that businesses have, right? And I don't know if any of y'all know this, but organizations are very protective of their colors, right? Their brand colors are so important. And I find it's a much easier sell if you keep the hue the same and just have something lighter and darker than if you start changing the hue.
I've also heard that text on a website is very different from like video content too. So sometimes like colors will have to be different for the website. The brand color could be one color, but you have to give liberty to people that do like video editing and things to let them change it.
Yes. And I think that has to do a lot with how video is like encoded and that kind of stuff and the displays that could be on. Unfortunately, I'm not terribly knowledgeable about video accessibility, but I would not be terribly surprised.
It's the same with print media too. That's
the other thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we, at this point, we found a color that works. Presumably, I like to think about like what is the systemic way that I could approach this, right? And what we've just done is we've fixed like one color, maybe. But presumably we would have something like a design system where now we could replace our red color with this color that we know works with a 4.5 to 1. And that way we start building this in so that like other people can use our design system and use color, like basically pre-vetted color combinations, right? And so it gets to this like idea of like you need a systemic approach. You need to build this into your systems and your processes in such a way that people can take advantage of the decisions that have been made without knowing why all of those decisions were made and how. So they use this red because it's the company red, not because, oh, I happen to know that this matches exactly 4.5 to 1.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just make it easy, make it accessible to people.
Hey, are y'all familiar with the metaphor of the pit of success?
No.
Okay, so this is I heard about it from Joel Spolsky's no, not Joel Spolsky's blog, but the Coding Horror blog, which is by I think one of the creators of Stack Overflow, but basically it's this idea that it should be really easy to do something right, even by accident, and it should be hard, but not necessarily impossible, but hard to do something quote wrong or harmful. You know, so we want to make it really easy for people working
to do
on
the
our
right
site.
thing.
Yeah, exactly. Make it easy to do the right thing. Make it hard to do the wrong thing. Because if someone can just, without even knowing, accidentally make an accessible site, great.
Yes.
So that's why I emphasize, like, if you're in a position where you have kind of these systemic foundations, things like design systems and component libraries, like build that stuff in, right? So that way people can take advantage of your infinite wisdom without having your infinite wisdom.
Love that. That's really cool. I'll put the link for it in there.
Yeah.
Okay. We talked a bunch about color contrast. Now I want to talk about people who can't see or have difficulty seeing to the point where they're using, I put without keyboard. What I meant with only navigating your site with a keyboard.
Yeah. So first of all, keyboard navigation is not just for people who are blind or low vision. Keyboard I hope this doesn't feel like a well actually like kind of thing, but like I just want to clarify, like we have the thing about disability, and I'll start here. Disability is so diverse. We're talking about such a wide group of people with a wide group wide array of needs, and no two people experience their disability in the same way. And also, you know, I've found that if you have one disability, you actually more likely have at least 3, right? Disabilities like come kind of in groups and you know, you can't talk, like you can't assume a spherical cow when it comes to, are y'all familiar with that? It's like a physics thing. But like you can't assume a spherical cow when it comes to disability. You can't assume a theoretically, you know, platonic ideal of what a disabled person or a blind person is, because everyone has kind of their own needs. But yeah, so keyboard navigation can be used basically by anyone who doesn't find a mouse useful or usable. So that might be someone who can't see because they can't see a cursor floating around some 2-dimensional plane in front of them, right? That's not a helpful model. But it could also be used by people, for instance, who don't have like the fine motor abilities to be able to use a mouse. So, for instance, someone with Parkinson's, someone with arthritis, right? Keyboard navigation could be really, really impactful for them. I call that out because we're about to dive into screen readers, and screen readers use a lot of keyboard navigation stuff, and people conflate this, and they'll talk about like keyboard navigability as though it's only a screen reader thing. And there are sighted keyboard navigator users, and there are sighted screen reader users, because screen readers could be useful for people who are blind, but also people who are low vision, or also I've heard of some people with dyslexia who benefit from screen readers as like kind of to.
I will fully admit, like I hate taking my hands off the keyboard to grab a mouse, so I will often try not to. So it is frustrating when that doesn't.
I was gonna say when I'm filling out forms, I often hit tab to tab through a form. Like, I don't go to my mouse and click it.
So one of my favorite people in the accessibility space is Adrian Roselli, and he put it kind of pithily in a tweet that's just wonderful, which is everyone's a keyboard user, when you're eating a sandwich with your mouse hand.
That's so great.
It's so good. But yeah,
Write
so
that
it's wonderful. But anyways, I bring that up just because, like, again, if you're making this assumption that a keyboard navigator is inherently not seeing your screen, like, there's this whole plethora of sighted keyboard and screen reader users that you're going to miss out on, right? And you're going to create possibly a worse experience for them. So just throwing in that caveat there. But yeah, so keyboard navigability is a great place to start, though. The main keyboard navigation when you're just doing like no screen reader, just keyboard, is going to be tabbing, right? And tabbing moves your focus throughout the page. And focus is supposed to go to keyboard interactable elements on your page. So that's going to be your links, buttons, and form fields, broadly speaking. And then you can use an attribute called tab index to make more keyboard focused little things. But the idea is if you can interact with it with your keyboard, you should be able to tab to it. And then there's this other idea of if you can interact with something with a mouse, then you probably need to also be able to interact with it with your keyboard.
Sorry.
What was that? I was going to show over on the site that you built too.
Okay. So again, this is the site that I intentionally made to be as inaccessible as possible. And so we're going to have a quick problem, which is, have you noticed this problem as you're trying this, Brittany?
I mean, I've noticed that I can't tab through the navigation.
No, you are tabbing through the navigation. You just don't see it.
Oh, I don't see it. You don't have an outline or a border.
I killed the outline because we've all had designers who are like, that outline is ugly. Let's remove it. But the moment you're tabbing through this page, you're like, where's my outline?
So we can see it when we get to the button. The button is tabbed right now, so it's active. And then when we tab off of it, it goes black.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And so assumably it's here now, but I don't know that it's there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I've made the site to be intentionally frustrating. If you wanted to find a site that has less frustration, benmyers.dev might be a good place to go.
Never heard of it.
Like, I know the interactions on it, and I know that it's
I love that. Oh wait, you don't have a main section. I was going to say that you made it intentionally inaccessible, but you still made it semantic. That's why you don't say semantics, because it sounds like semantic.
Yes.
I just got it.
So good. That's what I'm a pun-driven developer. Yeah.
Oh my
and so
gosh.
Anyways, so this demo site, I actually downloaded a template from html.design and I adapted it to make it less accessible. However, a lot of the original markup is still in there, but I removed the focus outline. But yeah, as you're tabbing through, this is already a pain point. So maybe let's actually go to if you still have my low contrast article up. Let's go to that one and let's just start tabbing. And so this is going to hopefully start you. Oh, it started you. I see. Yes. Let's start maybe if you could click at the very top left corner. Let's start at the very beginning. So instantly a thing has appeared. Have you all heard of skip links?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I was trying to use yours earlier. I don't know if this works.
I cheated and focused on the heading, the H1, which is not necessarily what you're supposed to do. It's weird. Anyways, but it should be, again, working, just the focus isn't actually showing. But
I see. Okay.
Anyways, if you keep going, you'll see that really anything that you can tab to has some sort of focused presentation. I probably need to do a better job at unifying that, but you can basically always tell with a visible state that something has changed.
I love how bright your outlines are and stuff. That is usually very small and difficult. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's one of those things of as an accessibility practitioner and advocate, right? I do try to go a little more than what's necessarily expected, just mainly also reputation stuff, right? But just to feel it can be done and still look good. Because I think the misconception about accessibility is that accessible equals ugly.
I didn't really realize that when you tab to the URL that it goes to or whatever it is shows up in the bottom left.
Yeah.
I did not realize that. So that's neat.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, as you can see, we've got this visible focus that's going on, but you're tabbing, and the only thing that's getting tabbed to are the keyboard interactive bits, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how focus is supposed to work. Now, when you're using a screen reader, things get a little more complicated because there is focus. There is like tab to focus, but then screen readers also have other browsing modes to like skip through a page. So there's what's called the virtual cursor, which goes to any element on the page. So that's how you would be able to read text and images and stuff like that. But then screen readers also have ways to skip between elements of a similar type. So to jump from heading to heading, or image to image, or table to table, or link to link, and stuff like that.
I didn't realize that. That's cool.
Yeah. And so when folks talk about, for instance, like your heading order, right? They're talking about that because it benefits people who navigate the page by heading from heading to heading. So, and that's actually a lot of screen reader users. WebAIM, like every 2 years, does a survey of screen reader users, and they ask like, "Hey, what's the most common way you're navigating through a page?" And heading by heading is easily like the most common way. So that folks, because like the three of us were sighted. If we wanted to find content on a page, we would scroll through the page really quickly until we found the heading that we wanted. And we'd go, that probably looks like it's got the information I care about. So we could skim. But screen readers, if you're not using anything like skipping heading to heading, are fundamentally inherently linear, right? And so it's a like not quite equitable experience without that ability to skip between headings, because otherwise folks have to go through all that like front-loaded information to get to the content that the three of us can skim directly to. So heading to heading is really common, but this means that your headings have to make sense. Your headings actually have to describe the structure of the page. So the way I think about this is like, I think back to like high school and college when I had to write essays. And before I could write the essay, I had to turn in like a bulleted list outline of the essay I was about to write, because that describes like my sections and subsections and points and stuff like that. Headings are those bulleted items in that outline. Right. So this H1 that we've got, the H1 on my page is how to fix your low contrast text. And so that describes like the content of the page. You're only really supposed to have one H1 on your page, and it should probably be your page title. It should be what this page is about. And then the what if the web got better over 6 weeks? This is an H2 because that's a sub thought under, fixing your low contrast text. If you scroll down again,
for those who write Markdown, that's 2 hashtags, folks. Start there. Don't start with 1. Start with 2.
So get ratioed right here. This is an H2 because this is a sub thought under, fixing your low contrast text. It's, hey, you have to be able to get a ratio. We'll keep scrolling down because I've got a section on here of like, oh, here we go, making use of the ratios. This is a sub thought under getting the ratios. So this is an H3. So this document outline is like thinking of things in terms of this like bulleted list outline is critical for coming up with a heading structure that makes sense for screen reader users who need to hop from heading to heading on your page. It's also, if you use it right, great for things like search engine optimization. Helps Google understand your page. So it's like this knock-on benefit that's fantastic. What headings aren't appropriate for is I have some important text, so I want to make it look real big. Right? That's not what it is. If you do that, like you should probably use like a strong tag or something like that, and then improve the size with CSS. But like headings fundamentally need to describe the structure of your page. And we know this because we know that screen reader users can hop from heading to heading, and they find that in user surveys, we find that that is a really common, helpful way for users to navigate the page. So again, we're getting this insight from real people.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's really amazing. So I think something that I confuse all the time, how does ARIA come into play with a lot of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So
I do have another great blog on it called Semantic Selectors. If we want to bring that up, I can put it in the chat.
That's I would actually maybe start with, I've got a blog post called "What is ARIA," and I'll put a link to that in the Twitch chat.
That sounds way better.
And I'll put another one I've got in there in the chat. But okay, so we'll start first of all with Semantic HTML, because first of all, your browser is a godsend. And it does so much that you don't know what it's doing, right? You don't need to know. But one of the things it's doing is it is packaging up an alternate version of the DOM in a protocol that is specifically exposed to the operating system level for assistive technologies like screen readers to consume. This alternate version of the DOM is called the accessibility tree, and it's really cool. You don't need to know a whole lot about it, except for that's a thing that happens, is your browser is basically creating like an alternate DOM that is specifically for screen readers and other assistive technologies to consume.
We've got a VDOM, we got the DOM, we got an accessibility tree that's kind of
Yeah.
DOM-ish. How many other DOMs are there?
Well, actually, tons. Your browser is a tree-making machine.
That's
because
awesome.
what it does is it creates a DOM. It also creates something called the CSS object model, which is a tree that represents how your styles cascade, and then it combines those and merges those into something called the render tree. And there's also the accessibility tree, and stuff like that. Like this is what your browser does. Your browser takes a page and creates a crap ton of trees, and then it puts those trees where they need to be to create the experiences it needs. But for it to do that, it needs your help as a developer, because your browser is trying to make sense of the page such that it knows enough that it can convey what your page is doing to assistive technologies. And the number one way it does that is by using your markup, your HTML. So because you've used a nav element, like the NAV element, the browser knows, hey, this is a part of the page that users might care about because this is the page navigation. And they expose it to assistive technologies as a landmark, as a like kind of hotspot that they could skip directly to, much like they could skip from heading to heading. They're told, like screen readers are told, hey, you can skip from like nav to nav if you wanted to go directly to the page navigation.
Something I was actually trying on your site and the other site was to hit M for main content. Is that like one of the key things that you're supposed to be able to do with a keyboard?
I think that's if you have a screen reader active.
Oh, okay. I see.
Yeah. Screen readers inject a whole lot of hotkeys and stuff like that. But yeah, so browsers are turning your semantics, your HTML, into an experience that can be exposed to and consumed by assistive technologies like screen readers. The thing is, this is incomplete a lot of times, right? Because websites these days are a little more complicated, perhaps, than a document, right? This is the whole document versus apps debate. I'm not going to get into that, but suffice it to say, the web is complicated. Websites are complicated, and so there are gaps where, especially dynamic content is concerned, when you start getting like more application-like behavior. And so ARIA is a set of attributes. There are like 36 ARIA attributes, I think, last I checked, that specifically what they do is they change how elements are represented in the accessibility tree. They don't add any new functionality to the page. They don't change anything about their behavior on the page. They don't add interactions. They don't do anything except change how an element is represented in the accessibility tree. So you can provide additional information about this thing. So an example of this might be if you have a button that you're using to like show or hide some content, right? Like a traditional expand collapse widget. Well, it might be helpful for users to know, A, that's what this button does, and B, what the state of that expand collapse widget is, right? If you can't see, how do you know, like, is it showing the thing or is it hiding the thing? So there's an ARIA expanded attribute that you could put on that button. You could set it to true or false, depending on whether the content is shown or hidden. And when you change that, if the users like focus on the button as its ARIA expanded changes, because they've just hit the button, then when that ARIA expanded changes, the screen reader will announce like, hey, it's expanded now, or oh, it's collapsed now. So you're recognizing that application-like experiences are complex, but we still need to expose that information to assistive technologies. We still need to expose that state and role and stuff like that. So ARIA is like, the metaphor I've heard is like spackle, right? It's like you wouldn't build a house with spackle, right? No one should. It would be bad. It wouldn't be secure, right? It just would not be a good, strong foundation.
Like
but
it would leak, right?
Yes. Ask me about leaking sometime, Brittany. My house is a mess. But it would be bad, right? It would be too much. But some well-placed spackle is good. It makes a more robust experience, right? And so that's kind of where ARIA sits, is it curates the accessible experience for a screen reader user or other assistive technology users. And there are tons of assistive technologies out there. We haven't begun to talk about things like voice control or eye tracking or anything like that, right? There's just so much out there. But, it starts with your markup. But where there are gaps in your markup, ARIA might be able to allow you to get just a little bit further.
Would you say in your markup, like the semantics side of it, like we talked about nav, are there like very key ones that we should be using that people tend not to, like asides and things like that? What's that look like for you?
So the question of what semantics you should be using depends a lot on what kind of site you're building, right? No one's going to need the full domain, the full gamut of like 110 or so HTML elements, right? No one needs all of them. What you will use depends a lot on what kind of site you've got. If you've got a content site, then sure, like it's going to matter a lot more that you're using things like landmark elements, like the aside element or things like that. But if you're building a more dynamic, like app-like experience, maybe those are less common. But what you do need to know is like, hey, you should be using the button element if what you want is a clickable entity that performs an action. Because so one of my first articles I ever wrote, which I'll put a link to that one as well in the Twitch chat, was about this pattern I started seeing in React courses, React tutorials, where instead of using a button element, the instructor was using a div and then attaching a on click to that. And that feels gross, but so the thing is, it's not always entirely clear why it's gross. Like, what are the differences, right? And so one reason someone might choose to use a clickable div is that it's a blank slate to start from style-wise. Okay, I see where someone might be coming from there, right? The fact that they don't have to undo the button styles, but if you're gonna try to add a click event to a div and then make it look button-like, there's so many things you're missing out. First of all, that div isn't being exposed to screen readers and other assistive technologies as a button, so you have to add role equals button. It also needs to be keyboard navigable, so you need to add a tab index so that people can tab to it, and then you need to add key events so that they recognize for buttons it's enter and space. If you click enter or space, you can trigger the button. So that needs to be added in. That you would have gotten that by default had you used a button element, but at this point, sunk cost fallacy, right? Surely there can't be anything else. Up until the point you want to add more states, like you disable the button. Well, now you have to kind of reverse engineer that as well. And then someone calls you and goes, listen, coding cat dev, perfect dev, I use your site in high contrast mode, in forced colors mode, and your button doesn't look like a dang button because the browser builds its default styles for forced colors mode and whatnot out of the semantics you've used. And so now you have to go in and you have to add the styles for specifically high contrast mode. All these things, it's if it's that saying about reinventing the wheel, if every time you reinvented the wheel, you missed all the spokes.
Yeah.
So semantics
I have to say our coding cat site on high contrast is the darkest site I've ever seen. It's amazing.
So it is and it isn't, because the thing about forced colors mode or high contrast mode. So and this took me I was a professional web accessibility professional for 3 years before I started doing anything with high contrast mode. So this is misconceptions that I had. But for those who don't know, high contrast mode, there is for Windows in particular, there is an operating system level setting that basically says, let me turn on high contrast mode, or rather, let me turn on my contrast theme. And in fact, Windows 11 is moving to the Windows the contrast theme branding. And in web spaces, we're starting to call it forced colors instead of high contrast colors, because all forced colors does is it replaces in every application the default colors and gradients and borders and stuff like that with colors that have been specified at the operating system level. So the user could choose colors I want every link to be yellow, or I want every link to be green or something like that, right? They can choose whatever colors work for them. And some people, particularly people with migraines, will choose low contrast themes using this technology that was originally for high contrast themes.
Wow.
So
That's pretty wild. I didn't know
that's
that.
why we're starting to hear more
It might be
phrasing
why I
like,
have migraines
contrast
too.
themes. Yeah, it's more like contrast themes or forced colors instead of high contrast, because you can't necessarily guarantee. But when you said your site looks super dark, it's because the theme that's being used or emulated, depending on how you're viewing it, uses a dark background. But someone could just have easily have said, I want actually a white background when I'm in forced colors mode. So little tidbit there.
Yeah,
Forced
that's
colors
really
mode,
cool.
super cool.
Very cool. Yeah. I gotta check our list. Like I've gone all over the place for this is so
I know.
much.
That's one of the problems of like talking about like accessibility is it's such a big umbrella that like it's like hard to like feel like you're tackling it concretely. It's just fun to think about.
Yeah, it's super fun. It's also like I think at a business level, which you kind of mentioned, it's super painful and frustrating too because I wrote this in here, but the Domino's issue came up where like they got the lawsuit, and that's really I think what finally highlighted a lot of this for people that lawsuits were actually going to happen. So started to finally like force companies to actually realize this is a thing. Pay attention.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to really quickly just
Yeah.
read this. It says in the United States, 61 million adults are living with disability. I don't know if that's 2017 or not. But then it also says,
depending on like who you're asking and how they define disability. There's different numbers for like what percentage of Americans are disabled. If you ask the U.S. Census Bureau, based on their definition of disability, it's like 1 in 5 or 1 in 4, depending on kind of when and whom you ask. So 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 people has some form of a disability. And you think about like how that can impact people's ability to do critical functions. So I used to work at a bank, and one of the things we were taught is that in particular elders are like as they age and become less able to independently manage their finances, whether because of physical or mental disabilities accrued by aging, they increasingly have to entrust their finances to their family members, their younger family members. And this puts them at a significant risk of being taken advantage of. Elder fraud and elder abuse is a significant problem for banks that like, or anyone who deals with finances, right? But if we can build a site that allows people to manage their finances independently, even as they age, this puts them at a place where they have more independence, right? And they're less likely to be taken advantage of. Like this stuff matters, and it matters a lot, and it matters for people because ultimately, like I think of things of like my job. I'm a front end developer. My job is not to sling around JavaScript. It's not to do React or TypeScript or Svelte or HTML or CSS. That's not my job. My job is to build an experience, an interface that people can use. And that includes disabled people. It includes a lot of disabled people. And it's ensuring that they have equitable access to those things.
Yeah, that's incredible. So I have this in here. I didn't know if we'd get to it or not, but when you're working on Microsoft's docs, like how much I don't know, thought's probably the wrong word, but like is that your first motivator, or is it getting like the info out that you need to first and then accessibility afterwards?
So Docs is a surprisingly large project, and there are lots of people who have lots of hands on different pieces of the puzzle. So I would describe like my role as the part of Docs that's like the like kind of visual scaffolding, that kind of stuff. I don't write the content. We have teams that write the content, and those are usually mostly like the product teams, right? But I build basically the like visual skeleton that the content lives in. And so my role is much more directly around the accessibility. Right, because we have to make sure that the like we can't control all of the content authors, but like we like do control the visual interface, and we are constantly looking into ways of like how can we make this interaction accessible, right? How do we ensure that like links work and buttons work and stuff like that, and also how do we do that in a way that's internationalization friendly, because Microsoft Docs supports up to 70 different languages. Some of which are right to left, like Arabic or Hebrew. right, and stuff like that. So how do we ensure not only that this works for our wonderful English-speaking friends, but also our French-speaking friends, our Arabic-speaking friends, right? All that stuff. It has to be accessible for them too, right?
It was like you said earlier too, like setting them up for success and giving them that good foundation too.
Absolutely. And so accessibility is a huge part of it. And Microsoft, in my experience, has been very committed to accessibility. I've been very impressed overall with the kind of processes for that. We have a lot of the processes that a lot of companies would be familiar with. Like we have a team of accessibility testers who perform audits and stuff like that. And we have regularly scheduled audits. This is a thing that like when you're in bigger corporations like Microsoft, you become very familiar with. But so that is... it's hugely important to us. Microsoft's mission is that we're here to empower everyone to do more, and that everyone includes disabled people, it turns out.
Which are 1 in 4 people, apparently. So
I know we are like way over time too. I did want to ask you, do alt tags, do you describe anything? Do you describe non-important images also?
Ooh, interesting. What do you mean by non-important, Brittany?
Well, like a visual image that might not add relevancy to the words around it.
Okay, so you're describing decorative images.
Yes.
Is what that is. Okay, so alt text is its own can of worms. And again, this is one of those things where I firmly believe like the people you should be listening to on this are the people who are impacted. So namely blind and low vision people who rely on alt text. Like I am synthesizing what I have heard from these people, but please take it with a grain of salt and ask, like see what they have to say on this matter. But in my opinion, images can have 2 ways in which they convey meaning. They can convey literal information, facts, direct contents, right? And they can convey the emotion and tone, right? So a playful image might be a decorative asset, right? Mm-hmm. But what it does is it adds to the overall playfulness of the site, right? And so this is something where like we're trying to convey 2 things here. And so it's hard to come up with a hard and fast rule for like when do you describe versus when is something decorative. Broadly speaking, if like I have something that looks like an icon next to text, like if I have a printer icon next to the word print, the printer icon is totally decorative, does not add anything. It would only add clutter, right? But like things like I have an illustration of AJ the cat or whatever, that's important because that's your tone, that's your brand, that's who you are, right? People should know that. And so when I'm writing alt text, the way I think about it is how would I describe this image if I were on the phone with a friend of mine? Like I'm on the phone, I'm having a casual conversation, and I want to describe to them this cool image I have in front of them. What would I say about it? And that allows me to think about like what's important, what would they want to know, what is too little? Because if I say, oh, this image, it's of a code snippet, you're instantly like, what code though? Right? Like that code matters, are we talking a spell component? Is this, some like TypeScript or like, what is it? Like, what was the actual like lines of code? What is this trying to do? What is it accomplishing? So describing an image as though I were talking about this image to a friend of mine over the phone lets me think like, what matters? How much detail do I need to give? What is too much detail? And also, turns out my friend is like, theoretically a real person who lives in the world, right? And therefore has like worldly context, worldly knowledge, right? So if I have a picture of President Joe Biden in front of me, right? People know who Joe Biden is, right? I don't need to describe like, oh, this is a white man in a blue suit with white hair, right? I don't need to say that.
I'm so nice with that description. I love it.
Well, like the thing is that wouldn't be a helpful description, right? Because turns out there are lots of white men with white hair.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
But what matters is President Joe Biden, right? But then even then that gets tricky too. There's lots of discussion over like, should you supply like someone's race or gender in alt text? I will absolutely defer to blind people on that. But like all this to say like, or like, we could bring this to like fictional characters, right? Like Mickey Mouse or the Queen of England, all fictional. Like
the Queen of England is fictional.
It took so long before, yeah. But like, like describe like these are characters who exist in the world, right? So one of the things I like to do when I'm just like when I post pictures of my cat on Twitter, like folks who have been following me for a while know that I have a cat named Tuna, right? And this cat comes up in a lot of my pictures because he's adorable and he's perfect. But what I'll do is I'll say like in the picture, like maybe it'll be like, Tuna like curled up on the like a purple blanket or whatever. I'll say like Tuna, comma, a tabby cat, comma, is curled up on a purple blanket. He looks really cozy, right? Like I'm conveying the literal stuff. I'm conveying this is like a recurring character that people might know if they know me, right? Like it's not a generic cat, it's my cat, Tuna. But like anyone who doesn't know, he's a tabby cat, right? And then I'm describing what he's doing. I'm describing it with like evocative adjectives like cozy that like give the tone, right? This is
nice.
Adding more detail than just dog.
Kind of telling a story to someone about an image.
Yeah, because I shared the image for a reason, right? It's look at my cute cat. That's the reason, right? I want people to get the warm and fuzzies.
Curl up with a can of tuna? Is that ever an image or no?
So no. However, I do want to give a shout out to my friend Adrian Mallet, who did send me a like little cat scratcher thing that looks like a giant can of tuna that he can get inside. Unfortunately, my tuna is too giant for the giant tuna.
That's fine.
But anyways, like, yes, those are things to like think about, right? You're conveying the literal description of what is there, but you're also trying to convey the tone. And if you're looking at this and going, well, okay, but like this is kind of redundant because like other things, like those flourishes are elsewhere on the page, or we have, again, an icon next to some text that like these two things are paired, right? Then you can go, this is decorative. I'm not going to supply alt text at all. We're going to set like alt equals the empty string. Alt equals the empty string is different than not providing alt. This is important. If you leave off the attribute altogether, then the screen reader will attempt to come up with a name for the image. And what it's going to use is the file path, like the source attribute, which is ugly because we know how image paths look. Those static assets, they're never great. Never what you want. But instead, if you do alt equals the empty string, what you do is you convey to the browser, hey, this image, it's not important. Don't even include it in the accessibility tree whatsoever. As far as screen readers are concerned, this image doesn't exist. So these are two separate things. And I always have to be very careful. Like empty alt is distinct from not supplying an alt attribute.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's a huge tip.
But you would only want to do that if you're very confident that like this image, if I were to supply this image to screen readers, it would only provide clutter.
Like you mentioned the icon, because if you put alt of print on an icon next to the word or link print, it's going to say print, right?
Yeah.
So it's just like redundant.
Yeah,
absolutely. So that's those are things like, and it's all very contextual, but it's like it's good to know, right? So a decorative image is like purely like if you were to expose this to screen readers, it could only ever be considered clutter, right? Because it's a decorative flourish. It's from the like beginning days of the web when like a flourish would actually be like an image source equals decorative swoosh .png or whatever, or .gif probably. And so it's like designed to like cull those from the page.
I feel like I could talk to Ben all day long, and we probably could, but
alas,
we literally have to get to perfect dev so I don't get fired. So
incredible.
Perfect dev.
Here is our
you're on perfect dev. But...
Here's our perfect picks from perfect.dev.
Yes. So I was on Jen's stream earlier. If you don't know, Jen Janad is a new streamer who is very, very new to like front end development, and she is taking the incredibly brave and excellent step of streaming her like journeys learning tech.
I love her Twitter handle.
Yes. It's so good. So you absolutely should follow her. I'll put a link to her Twitch in the Twitch chat here. But she's been having people come on to talk to her like about just various aspects of tech. I was on her stream literally this morning talking about accessibility, and we took a completely different angle from this. And so there's just so much accessibility stuff, and you should go follow her.
That is fantastic. And your next pick?
Dan Jadan, also kind of new to the streaming world. He's
in the solid community, right?
Yeah, he's on the Solid core team, specifically working on Solid's documentation. He's also joining Astro full time. He was working there as a contractor, but he's joining full time. So he's very embedded in kind of the like web frameworks. Yes, and so I will be on his stream in a few days on Monday, and we are also doing Intro to Accessibility. And every one of these streams, I'm hoping, feels very different because accessibility really needs to be like you figure out like it's almost choose your own adventure, right? You pick your thing and you just follow that rabbit hole and you learn more about people and how they experience the web and you make it better for them.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Even if they're all the same, if someone gets something out of it, that's the key.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, you should go follow both Jen and Dan. They are wonderful folks.
I'm going to go ahead and jump to you, Alex, because I realized I didn't have them open. So I'm going to let you talk about this one.
Sure. So this is a fun little JavaScript library that provides fireworks for your site, which I was looking for. I was using a different JS library that I could drop cats and things, which if you go out to my code pen, you can see it's pretty funny. However, if you go, can you scroll down to where the demo is and just click the demo? It's like just above there in the table of contents. Up a little more. Keep going.
It is. This one?
Yeah, I think you got it.
Oh, nice.
So that's what the fireworks show up as, and I think it's super fun just to add little fun flair like this.
My whole house is vibrating. I'm sorry.
What's that?
My whole house is vibrating. Scary.
As long as they haven't run into it yet, you're good.
No.
My second pick, if you have it.
Yeah, I copied it, I think. There we go.
Okay. Next.js 12.2 came out a little bit ago now, but if you haven't played around with it, so I think this is from June, right? If you haven't played around with it, the middleware changed significantly from when they first released it, I think at least. They did make it simpler though. I feel like, and everything you can do is in a middleware.ts file instead of like all this crazy nesting and things like that. So definitely check that out. We're probably going to do some more stuff with Tim Benix and talk about how to like do some personalization and things like that coming up soon. So middleware helps out with that a ton.
I'm excited about that. I'm going to have to start working some more with Next.js too. So
yeah. The other piece that I'm really excited about on their side. So we are already doing on-demand ISR, which has been huge for us to not have to rebuild the site, and it just kind of magically works. And we can also do revalidation. However, the new one that I'm super excited about, I hope like this can come out relatively soon, is the Edge API routes. So I'm pumped to dive into this further. I am a little worried that they are going to have to change this before the global availability. So we'll see where that comes. But check out Next 12.2. It's got some cool stuff in it.
Yeah, I'm interested in this. So, all right. So mine, I have 2 binge streams that I was on, and I wanted to showcase them. So we have showmy.chat is Ben's Twitch integration for OBS that you can show your chat stream on Twitch. And I had him on my stream to show me how it works. And we did that and had a lot of fun showing it off. And I started my own that I have not finished because I have no time, called Bubbles, Brittany's Bubbles, or something we called it. But it's fun. And then my second one is build a component library with SvelteKit with Brittany Postma, although most of it has probably changed at this point by the time you're listening to it. So
that is, you can see right there is one of the like most viewed streams on the channel. I think you're being
awesome.
I think you're being out by Remix, and then Alex Trost coming on to talk about Prismic and Next.
Oh my goodness!
Like, basically, like you're like the third.
I don't have it liked either. There, it's liked.
But I firmly believe that with the support of, I think this is still my show now. I think I still have the hostile takeover. I think with the support of the Coding Cat and Perfect Dev audience, I think we can make that, the most viewed stream on the Semantic YouTube channel.
That would be fantastic.
Go click that like button, folks.
Absolutely.
Drop that link in. Where's it at?
Like, follow, subscribe, hit that bell.
I lost my Twitch stream, so I can't.
Oh, no.
I can do it on the Coding Cat one.
It's all good.
There we go. Yeah. Thank you so much, Ben, for coming on. This was so
Yes.
fun and informative. Yeah,
Yeah.
this was awesome.
I think we're gonna have to have you back for a part 2. Like, there's just so
Right.
much to cover still.
Yeah.
There is.
Yeah, this is only scratched the surface, and I'd love to, at some point maybe do some more like tangible, like let's go in, let's actually like test with assistive technologies. I think that'd be tons of fun and hugely valuable.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Yeah, let's schedule that. Cool.
All right.
I'm not gonna forget this week because I've forgotten every other week. We're gonna raid somebody today.
Oh, we're gonna raid.
Ooh, who are we
So
raiding?
We have B Holmes. We've got Cassidoo. Cassie has like 0 people watching, which is weird. Maybe
She must have
that's-
just started
maybe
because
that's-
that is not accurate.
I
But B
did-
Holmes Dev is great. He's on the Astro team also with Titanium now. Apparently, that is incredible. That
Man,
he's
all the
going
people
over-
going to Astro. Astro is an amazing product, but
Yeah.
I did hang out with Cassie this past
B Holmes
weekend.
could use
Maybe
the
I
crowd.
should-
Cassidy has like 80.
You got a good point. Okay, we're doing home.
Do
There
it.
we go. Have fun.
Peace.
We
folks.
ride.
Later.
We'll see you soon.
Bye, y'all.
I'm gonna play our outro and see if that still works. I don't know how this whole raid thing is gonna work. So, see ya.
It's